We all together, all ready. Now, you remember that central realm, which is the realm of manas. I love this word, so I'm using it, is the realm that we're really talking about. It's the realm that is motivated by kama, illumined by buddhi, and our journey takes place then in this psychic realm of consciousness. It's a realm where really there can be built a bridge, if you like, the rainbow-colored bridge of the gods. You have this in Norse mythology, the rainbow-colored bridge Bifrost, which is said to unite the world of the gods with the world of the humans, or becoming human, and the world of the, we'll put it, the animals and plants. We might as well put both. The world of the concrete. Might as well put it all, minerals too. So there's the rainbow-colored bridge that unites the world of the gods and the world of the humans. And it is said that the chief archetype of our age, is the divine-human partnership. The divine-human partnership. Through, then, the creative faculties of manas. This is the journey that we are taking. This is what everyone, really, there's a hunger today for spiritual experience, I think. One sees it in the world. An experience that is meaningful, that provides purpose for living. Who are the gods? I suppose that question arises.
Excuse me, when you say divine-human partnership, what exactly do you mean?
I mean that we must become co-creators, co-participants in the creative process.
So we are a partner
with that divine being, those divine presences. The gods, I use that term, not God, but aspects or emanations from the one spiritual reality. Does that make sense? The gods are those felt presences, if you like, who underlie and inform our existence. And so, in all great myths, they've been given many names, many aspects. We have them, you know, the whole pantheon of gods and goddesses in the Greek mythology, the gods and goddesses of Hindu mythology, and so on. We've rather forgotten it, I think, in the Christian mythology, but they are there as the archons. Unfortunately, part of this was exterminated by the paternalistic church fathers. But it was there. It's there in the Gnostic tradition. One comes on it again in the great Gnostic texts, you see, in Christianity. Any other questions, incidentally? Any other points that anyone wants to bring up at this stage?
Would
yes.
it be seraphim, cherubim?
Yes, all the principalities and so on, yes.
So
it's in the scriptures, you see, but overlooked. We go through it, you know.
It's not approved of. It's not approved of.
Not much approved of, and not much talked about, you see. But these are the felt presences which underlie our existence. And so it's a partnership that has to come about. It's interesting, even in some realms in contemporary physics, it's being said that we are co-creators, we are co-participants. It's a participatory universe. This is indeed the phrase that Dr. John Wheeler, the physicist, has used, associate of Albert Einstein. It's a participatory universe. And it's for us to build this bridge. It's one of the great images presented in so many of the great myths. A bridge, we find it in the Navajo tradition, in the Navajo Indian tradition. And in the Scandinavian legends, Lancelot, in one of the versions of the Grail legend, walked on the edge of a sword blade, a bridge, to reach the country where his lady was held captive. And of course, the lady, symbol of the soul. And what is the sword blade? The sword is symbol of manas, always. A sword, because it can cut in two directions, as it were, you see. Divides. And it's often the mind can divide, but it can also unite. So it's very interesting. Bodhidharma in the great Buddhist tradition crossed the ocean of existence on a reed, a slender reed. This is manas, true manas. And this bridge, very often, as part of manas, has been called the antakarana, which is an interesting term. Between two causes is the literal meaning of antakarana. So for those of you who are students of some of the literature, you see, in The Voice of the Silence, it's referred to. The antakarana, it's between two causes, is the literal meaning. Here is the causative realm and another causative realm. And so the bridge over that is said to be the bridge between, therefore, the higher and lower aspects of manas. It's the bridge between this shore and that shore, you see. The bridge between our personal existence and the further shore of our true being. In the Mazdaean tradition, as part of Islam, the bridge was said to be projected from a mountain peak. Very interesting. And I'm going to refer, I don't know whether tomorrow or Monday, to one of my favorite little works called Mount Analog. I don't know how many of you know Mount Analog by the French writer René Dalmal. And I'm hoping, well, in fact, I'm not just hoping, I plan that we're going to engage ourselves in the ascent of Mount Analog. This is a wonderful little work. It's just come out in a pocket edition published by Shambhala last year. Just to excite you a little bit, the subtitle of Mount Analog is a novel of symbolically authentic, non-Euclidean adventures in mountain climbing. Isn't that a marvelous title? And so we're going to take the adventure up Mount Analog, you see. But this is the bridge, then. As I say, in the Mazdaean tradition, the bridge was said to be projected from a mountain peak, the peak of judgment at the center of the world. And on this bridge, the soul's final destiny was decided, for it could be reached only after death. But what kind of death is required? On the spiritual journey that we'll be taking, we meet with many deaths, of course. Each one must be faced with a purity of intent and with a courage that nothing can daunt. There's a West African story, marvelous story, in which an individual, a man, creates a magic bridge with a chain of arrows, which he shoots alternately into the near and far shores. It's very interesting symbolically, isn't it? He creates the bridge, and we actually create the bridge between the humans and the gods. The gods are reaching to us, but we have to create the bridge. Why? Because we have to move in full self-consciousness to this other side.
Does this have anything to do with Dr. Doolittle's chain of monkeys?
I think it may, yes, yes. That's great, Gavin, yes. One finds it in so many places, but I love this West African story in which he shoots the arrows alternately. He establishes one here, as it were, shoots one on the near side, then shoots one to the farther side, and eventually builds a bridge. Louisa Kumaraswamy, in a wonderful essay on the perilous bridge, has stated, it is not only in a future life that the end of the road can be reached. The shores are but an arrow shot apart. If one knows what is the arrow and how it must be released. It's a wonderful statement, isn't it? So the image of the arrow, of course, is an interesting one, especially as it relates to the spiritual journey. So this is the journey. If we think of this journey as crossing the bridge between our ordinary everyday nature, our everyday existence, our historical story, and our essential being, our mythic story, our new being, then what is the arrow which can be shot from this shore to the other shore? It's very interesting. Arrows, of course, hint at two things: speed and direction, don't they? Speed and direction. Arrows pierce. We have the image of the pierced heart, you know. The arrow of Cupid. Isn't that right? What is the bow? And who is the holder and wielder? And you remember in the Odyssey, when Odysseus finally reached home, Ithaca, and you know we all have an Ithaca. What is your Ithaca? What is your Ithaca towards which you're traveling? What are the adventures on the way? And when he reached home, you remember, Penelope, his wife, who was the feminine aspect and really the queen, was still a matrilineal. This was, you see, it marks the change. The Odyssey marks the real change from a matrilineal to a patrilineal culture. It's very interesting to observe this in the Odyssey. One can study it from that point of view or look at it from that point of view. But when he reaches home, you remember she has been pursued by many, many suitors who were trying to convince her that Odysseus was dead. And so why didn't she marry one of them? Now, why did they want her? Because she represented wealth. You see, it was still, from an outer point of view, it was still a matrilineal culture. She was the queen. So they wanted her, but in essence, she represents Sophia. She represents wisdom, forever weaving. Remember, the image of weaving. Penelope is always at the loom. She weaves during the day and unravels at night. You know, you remember? It's marvelous. The symbology is tremendous if you really look at it. And so here are all these suitors that are after her because they want her wealth. And so she devises, when Odysseus comes disguised, he comes disguised as a beggar. Very appropriate at that stage of the journey, incidentally. We'll look a little bit later this afternoon. I think it will have to be, because I'm not even getting through what I'd planned to do this morning. Anyway, she devises a scheme to finally say who will wed her. It's a marvelous story. I'm sure you know the Odyssey. You've all probably had to read it at some time or other. I remember having to read it, and I loved it because it had such beautiful phrases, even in the English translation. Obviously, I didn't read it in the original Greek. But beautiful phrases, you know, rosy-colored dawn, and, you know, many-armed Athena, strong-armed Athena, and so on. Goddess of wisdom, all of that, who was always by Odysseus. And so Penelope devises this plot, as it were, to determine. And she says that whoever, he will get out the bow of Odysseus, which is, of course, a tremendous bow. Whoever can pull it, string it, and pull it, and shoot the arrow straight, that individual she will wed. And, of course, suitor after suitor tries, and none of them can even pull the the bow. They can't even pull it taut to release the arrow. They can't even get it to pull back. And the beggar says, "Let me try." And of course, then she recognizes Odysseus, because he has been through all the trials. He has taken the hero journey. And without any effort, he pulls back the bow and releases the arrow. And she knows, of course, she says, "That is the man I will wed." Well, of course, she's already married to him, and she recognizes Odysseus. Marvelous, you see. So what is the bow? We have it also in the Mahabharata, the great epic of India, of which the Bhagavad Gita is but one episode, you may remember, in the whole Mahabharata, the great epic of India. Sri Krishna has the bow always, doesn't he? You see. So what is the bow? There's a wonderful story, a modern myth, as it were, presented by Howard Pyle in a little book called The Garden Behind the Moon. It's a beautiful one, in which a young boy, David, makes a journey from his home village where he's been neglected and scorned, which is usually the way with the individual who starts out on this journey. He's either a simple fool like Parsifal. Remember, Parsifal at the beginning doesn't even know his name. So when I say, "Who are you?" you know, who are you? You see, Parsifal says, "I am called." A nice boy, a lovely boy. He doesn't know his name, you see. So what is the name of the self? Do you know your name? Do you really know your name? You see. You consider it. Think about it, you see. So, or the individual starts out as a simple-minded fool, and that's what David is. He's been neglected, he's been scorned, he's the one, you know, that's the way we start out, pure, simple-minded. We ought to be simple-minded. And he wants to go to the other world of the moon and its delightful garden. That's his Ithaca. What is your Ithaca? You see. It's an interesting tale because we're all returning to our own Ithacas as Odysseus returned to his Ithaca. Well, the bridge he must cross in this case, in this story, is over the sea to the moon. Very interesting, because in this realm, you see, which is Kama, better use some black here. This realm is Kama. Here the energy has been transmuted and known as buddhi. You see. It's always an energy present. There's always an energy field, if you like, to use a contemporary word from physics. It's a field in which there is energy. And so the energy here is Kama, which is always represented as an ocean, as a sea. The sea of the unconscious, if you like. The sea in which there arises consciousness, the island of consciousness. So he must cross over the sea to the moon, and by means of a path of light, that the newly risen moon, the moon is always feminine, and all of these, in fact, in the story of Odysseus, you may think that I'm fascinated with it, but I am, because that's, again, it's a transition period in cultural history, actually. But again and again, where is Odysseus? On the water, isn't he? You see, he's sailing. And so here, and the moon is always the feminine, and in the Odyssey, Odysseus's initiations or transformations, there are three of them, three major ones, are by the feminine, are always by the feminine. This was true of the mysteries of Eleusis, the Eleusinian mysteries, which are feminine mysteries. So remember that. So this is to the moon. There's a path of light that the newly risen moon casts on the waves. And at the exact moment, this young boy, David, must step out on the wriggling bar of moonlight on the top of one wave and jump to the next. Well, he does not succeed the first time. Most of us don't the first time. Anyway, and he nearly drowns. And I can tell you, a lot of people have been drowned in the psychic realm of the unconscious and become literally drowned in the phenomenalistic realm of psychism. That is the tragedy that can happen when you don't.
What happens to them?
Well, you get another chance if you finally surface again. You may not in that incarnation, but this is the dangers.
What happens to people?
Well, sometimes it can go as far as what I call psychic suicide.
What happened to this one? What happened to this one?
Yes. So, but David was lucky. On his second try, he manages to jump from wave to wave until he finds himself on the broad silver path on which he can run easily. So it tells us a little bit about how this bridge is to be crossed. It's a perilous bridge, yes, as Louisa Kumaraswamy calls it. It's a razor edge, as has been often said. It's the edge of the sword that Lancelot had to cross, and so on. So it's really, there is a bridge at the very beginning of our spiritual journey. And the bridge, of course, is within, this inner bridge. And it's never crossed without difficulty, without some suffering. In the Mabegonian, the great myth of the Celtic people, you know, tremendous myth, there's an interesting statement. Who would be chief, let him be the bridge. It's a marvelous statement. Who would be chief, let him be the bridge. And actually, there are those, you see, who offer themselves voluntarily as the bridge, from another point of view, into this realm. And so, in theosophical tradition, we have the Mahatmas, the adepts, those who have touched the further shore. And they have offered themselves as bridges. And it is said, and I can only say it is said that they have delayed their progress in order to help us to serve, as it were, as a bridge between our world and theirs, the world of the gods. We have to become the bridge. We have to, which is also to say, as the voice of the silence puts it, thou canst not travel on the path until thou hast become that path itself. The path is always a bridge, in a sense, a bridge between what we are and what we will or can be. But the crossing is within. It's a movement of consciousness. It's instantaneous, like the flight of an arrow, like David's leap from wave crest to wave crest at the rising of the moon, you see, which is again by reflected light. So in all traditions we're told that once crossed, however, the bridge must disappear. That is to say, in any outer way, because now the bridge is truly within. The Buddha, for example, bade the traveler forget his raft when the other shore had been gained. We don't have to carry the means of transport with us. There are other legends, of course. In some legends, the shores are joined so that there is no difference between this world and that. It's the same thing that the great Buddhist teacher Nagarjuna of the 2nd century suggested, that the world of thisness, the world of existent things, called samsara, the world of thisness, is the same as the world of thatness, the realm of reality, nirvana. The world of thisness is the world of thatness. Samsara is nirvana, said Nagarjuna. Nirvana is samsara. Between the two, there is no difference. So they are linked. There is that. So the bridge disappears because there's no separation now. The manas is clear. Manas is now sees in both directions. And so there is no thisness or thatness. The world of the humans and the world of the gods have been united. They're one world. In one sense, then, we leave one world in another, but in another sense, we find that we're both worlds at once. And these worlds are really one world, just one world. That, perhaps, is the Ithaca. So the spiritual journey across the bridge of our being is not to a distant land of paradise, but to the fulfillment of our being right here and now, in this world, which is both transient and at the same time enduring. So again, it's taking this journey, which is no journey, if you like. Marvelous metaphors that can be used. The paradox is always there, do you see? So we stumble around for words in it, but it really is difficult to describe in words. And so we use these wonderful metaphors, I think, of the bridge, the arrow, and so on, all of that. Does that make sense? So, any questions, any comments? Yes?
Is it the same symbol where you read about King Arthur and he has to pull the sword?
Just pull the sword out.
And the other ones couldn't do it.
That's right. Yes. And then you remember at the end, the sword sinks back in, you see.
No one else could have it.
No one else could have it. Because once, you see, you must find your own way. You must learn to pull the sword for yourself, as it were.
Is there some particular meaning, do you think, of the one you used earlier, the African one, the arrow to the other shore, and then to the shore?
Sure. Yes. Because I think there's a great deal of symbology in that. The question is, in the West African myth, of shooting the arrows alternately between this shore and that. To me, it's that we have to ground ourselves here, you see. We have to really be here. It would be wonderful to just shoot the arrows into the other world, into the other realm, the realm of the gods, and walk over the bridge and ha-ha, now we are the gods. The theosophical path, it seems to me, that is very clearly outlined for us, particularly in the voice of the silence, is that we are not to rest in some aloneness, what is known as the pratyeka buddha state. The theosophical worldview suggests, as I see it, and I always add that, that we are to bring from that world into this and establish here the whole meaning of that world, and that we are to be grounded. HPB is very clear in one sense on this, that, to put it in another way, that every step must be taken in physical incarnation. Every step on this path must be taken in physical incarnation. It would be wonderful if we could travel this road, you know, and the inner realms and never have to go through all of the trials, the road of trials that Odysseus did, that every great hero does, you know. It'd be great if Dante, in the Divina Commedia, which I do want to refer to also and utilize as an example, if Dante had not, where did he go first on the journey? When he awoke in the middle of a dark wood, which is a marvelous metaphor again for coming awake in the middle of a dark wood, he had to enter into the inferno. He had to know the depths before he could go through that bridging area of the Purgatorio to reach the Paradiso. There's 3 steps there, you see. Always, I think. So we have to be grounded. And I think that's why alternately in the West African myth, alternately, the arrow on this side is matched by an arrow on that side, which is matched by an arrow on this side, as it were. We build the bridge from here, and we don't leave here. I put it sometimes, because I like to make verbs out of nouns, because I think all nouns came from verbs. We have to nirvanize the world. It's for us. That's part of the partnership that we have to enter into. This is the task of our humanity, it is said. The task of our humanity as a creative hierarchy, to use terms out of the secret doctrine. The whole task of our humanity is to nirvanize the world. We would all like to disappear on the farther shore, be great spiritual beings, but we scarcely know what it is to be human. And only when we really know what it is to be human can we put the arrow on this side and then the arrow on the other side. And notice how many of our metaphors, for example, are drawn from the animal, plant, mineral level of our being, which are still present within us, still very much present within us. Don't think we've left them behind, We say that man is a wolf. That woman is catty. All right? Or that person is just vegetating. We talk about couch potatoes, looking at television all day, you see. We say his mind is clear as crystal. Or sometimes it's clear as crystal, or it's as hard as flint. You see. Look at our metaphors. How often do you hear someone say, that person is really fully human? We draw our metaphors from the past experiences through which the consciousness within us and all of the elements within us have passed. It's interesting to observe this because language preserves a great deal of it. And so we sort of thrust ourselves on this other side and say, such a spiritual being. I'm waiting for somebody to say, such a truly human being, fully, wholly human. What is it to be human? And of course, part of that is humus, to be grounded in earth, humus, as well as manus. Do you see? It's wonderful. The very word has it there. You analyze the word. So it has to be grounded. We have to, this is, I think, what contemporary physics is meaning by a participatory universe, that we are co-creators. There's a wonderful work by the Greek author of our century, Nikos Kazantzakis, who was a great mind, a great individual, perhaps very much overlooked. And Kazantzakis, towards the end of his life, of course, you probably know best Zorba the Greek, you see, which is Kazantzakis. But towards the end of his life, he wrote a profound work called The Saviors of God. It's a wonderful work, and I don't have quotes before me, but in effect, he said, God needs us as much as we need God. And only by being human can we save God. It's interesting, an interesting concept. Now, it's a very thin little book, so I recommend it very much. Nikos Kazantzakis. You'd probably like to know how it's spelled. Is that right? So I'll put it up here. I hope I've written it correctly. Kazantzakis. Nikos, N-I-K-O-S, Nikos Kazantzakis. I have no idea, I'm sorry to say. I really am sorry to say. But The Saviors of God. And it's a beautiful little book. Some may think it's very sacrilegious, that God needs us. But that's the legend, that's the story. That the gods need us as much as we need the gods. And so it's those aspects or emanations from the one spiritual reality, because it's the gods that have taken incarnation in the human in order that the human may eventually know what it is to be God. And so by that union comes about the final bridge between the one source and our own humanity. we can become what I would like to call rivers for the source, whose greater humanness serves to engage and illumine our own. Just a suggestion, you see. So the humans and the gods, or spiritual potencies, also mutually evolve each other. This is not an easy idea, but we have to see in one sense that we grow the gods within us, and we have to allow the gods their own growth. No idea, perhaps. Well, what I really wanted to come to, what I really started out to do this morning, we will now do in the last 15 minutes or so. And that is to suggest, are there questions? Are there any points that, you don't have to agree with me, you know, it's wonderful. Because as I keep saying, I suggest, I'm not saying that, you know, this is it. This is how I interpret a great deal of the Theosophical worldview, through the filter of Joy Mills. So, create your own story. This is the story I've created for the moment. If you ever invite me back, I may have another story. You know, be quite different. But because I think our stories evolve in that way. But now, all right, we're on this journey. We're on this journey. There are basically two ways that we can take the journey. And I think that was on one of the papers that you probably got. So we need to look at that. We can take the journey as tourists, or we can take the journey as pilgrims. And I think we need to really consider this distinction between being a tourist and being a pilgrim. I'm going to suggest some things, and then I'm going to ask you to suggest some things. A tourist, I suggest, goes forth. A pilgrim is called forth. Does that make sense? There's an inner call. This is what we call a vocation, you know. He has a vocation from vocal. He's called, you see. Voce, called, heard. You hear something, you see. Are you listening? Are you really listening? We'll look at that later. Now, what other things would you put down if you were asked? Yes?
Tourist views and pilgrim experiences.
What's that?
Tourist views and pilgrim experiences.
He views, and the pilgrim experiences. Yes?
Pilgrim tourist goes first class,
Uh-huh.
and pilgrim walks.
Ah. First class travel. All right? And the pilgrim walks. Uh-huh. Yes, that walking can be a variety of things, can't it? Yes. So I'll put it in quotes, yes.
Pilgrim's changed by his journey, and I don't think the tourist is really.
All right. Changed, unchanged.
He could be, but he isn't, some of that.
The tourist needs a visa.
Uh-huh. No visa. No visa required.
The
All right.
tourist prepares a lot of luggage to go,
Yes.
but the pilgrim goes with nothing.
All right, so he has a lot of baggage, and he is no baggage, put it. Or the less the better, yes.
The tourist goes back to his old
surroundings go back home where you came from. The pilgrim goes forward rather than going back again.
To old goes forward. To new. Yes, somebody.
The tourist is more concerned with getting to the place he thinks he wants to see, whereas the pilgrim is more concerned with the journey that he's taking.
All right. Concern with goal. And this is concern with the journey itself.
The tourist can't be the pilgrim. The tourist can't be the pilgrim.
Oh, yes, the tourist may eventually turn into a pilgrim.
Although the tourist takes first class travel and the pilgrim walks, the pilgrim gets there first.
Very interesting. Arrives first. Yes. So, well, since I'm running out of space, I didn't use the larger one.
I think the pilgrim stays with it through all difficulties, whereas the tourist doesn't plan to give up.
Yes, all right. That's very good. Gives up with any obstacles, anything that goes wrong. Well, he stays the course.
The tourist expects the leader or the organisation to take care of him
That's right.
and depends on them.
Uh-huh. Yes,
The pilgrim depends
on himself.
well, yes, and sometimes has a little help from a fellow pilgrim.
Yes. We'll meet with that in Mount Analog, by the way. And also, we'll meet with it also in the Divine Comedy, as you know, you see. Very interesting, as you may remember. I don't know how many of you have read the Divine Comedy recently or at all, but it's marvelous work, interpreted theosophically at least, I think. Tremendous work. Show this to show you that it's a rather large work, but it's a very interesting work. Dante has a guide at first, and his guide is Virgil. You see, the old Roman poet, the old Latin poet, Virgil. Reason, and yet reason tempered by poetry. But then when he comes to the Paradiso, Virgil cannot go any further. And who is his guide? Beatrice, Beatice, the representation of wisdom, you see. So there's a guide, but very different. And in the Odyssey, and if we get to some of it, I'm using not the Odyssey because I didn't bring that, but a wonderful new book which I highly recommend by Jean Houston, who's a wonderful author and worked with Joseph Campbell and Margaret Mead, and she established with her husband the Foundation for Mind Research, and she's director of what's known as the Mystery School, The Hero and the Goddess. And the goddess, of course, is Athene, who really protects and helps Odysseus at the most difficult times, appears and helps in various guises. Because we don't always recognize the gods and goddesses. They walk among us. They are with us. But we don't always recognize them, you see. But the pilgrim begins to recognize them. Well,
Could you say the pilgrim sees in the tourist the pilgrim?
well, to some extent, perhaps. But I think it's a basic distinction that a tourist goes forth to explore new environments, to explore unfamiliar customs, to interact with strangers. And the tourist ends up often interested in or irritated by what is found. I like this view. He views things, he observes. He's the observer, you see. The tourist expects things either to be different from the way they were at home or expects them to be the same. We have the picture of the so-called ugly American who wants a Hilton hotel, you know, in every city that's visited, and stays there and expects everything to be perfect. I can poke fun at the ugly American being an American. Some tourists, you know, find the slightest slippage in daily arrangements to be intolerable. If the food is bad, this never happens in a restaurant at home. It never rains at home. It only rains when you're to walk around Amsterdam or some other place. The buses never run late at home, but the tour bus doesn't arrive on time, you see. There's always these problems with the tourist. Things never seem to happen that way at home. Tourists, there's often a hidden expectation that one's going to get one's money's worth. Isn't that right? I paid for this tour. Therefore, I want my money's worth. The inconveniences that they may have suffered ought to guarantee that they've arrived in paradise. Tourists seem to fall apart often when things go wrong. That missed museum trip, we were supposed to go. Something happened, you see. Tourists get from their experience something we can call the other. They come home either enthusiastic about the other or determined never to leave home again. And note what they bring back. Tourists bring back memories, souvenirs, and photographs. Now, what about the pilgrim? I suggest that a pilgrim undertakes the journey not for information, but for transformation. A pilgrim travels to the self, not to the other. And usually a pilgrimage is to a sacred site. And then the pilgrim experiences the awesome presence, but an experience that may be imbued with a deep sense of having come home to the self. There's a feeling not of strangeness, but of familiarity. A pilgrim is no longer looking without at strangers, but within. And everyone he meets then is a part of himself. It's a totally silent event in the pilgrimage. I think we need this sense of being pilgrims. Someone has written this: pilgrims are persons in motion, passing through territories not their own, seeking something we might call completion, or perhaps the word clarity might do as well, a goal to which only the Spirit's compass points the way. It's a beautiful statement, isn't it? Well, as pilgrims, we are seekers. As tourists, we're out to have a good time, perhaps, or to see something new, unfamiliar, and so on. So we have to ask ourselves whether we're tourists or pilgrims. I think a pilgrim is one who doesn't have all the answers. The tourist often reads all the guidebooks in advance.
You would have an itinerary.
A tourist has an itinerary, a pilgrim really doesn't. Except an inner kind of itinerary, if you like to put it. I think a pilgrimage is a journey that is taken with an open heart, a willingness to experience the new. The opposite, really, of a pilgrimage is not so much a tour. The real opposite of a pilgrimage is a crusade. And I didn't put that up, but there are a lot of people who are on crusades, you know. But really, pilgrims go on pilgrimage as seekers. And of course, we have the classic, which I could have referred to also. The great classic of pilgrimage is what? the Canterbury Tales, isn't it? Let's see. One that Aprilla with his Shura Sutta, you see. The Drocht of March hath pierced to the Ruta, then longen folk to go on pilgrimages, and so on. To quote just the opening lines of that wonderful work, the Canterbury Tales, based, of course, on Boccaccio's work, the Decameron, and there are many, many works that are of pilgrimages. In one sense, all of us at some time or other are pilgrims. We're a pilgrim people. And it's interesting that the early settlers of my own country were called what? The Pilgrims, you see. And they came seeking what? Religious freedom. But then it became a crusade to, of course, convert the Indians that they found there, and a crusade to be sure that no one came that didn't agree with their religious views, and so on. But at least they were called, we still refer to them as the Pilgrim Fathers, you see. But we're a pilgrim people. So we can look at ourselves from this point of view, of being pilgrims. We're trying to learn a common creation story, some wisdom, some lost sense of why we inhabit this globe together. A true pilgrim is not steeped in righteousness, but in humility. And perhaps that's another distinction. A pilgrim is always aware that he or she has not yet arrived. There may be dark passages to go through, empty spaces that need to be explored. The pilgrim is really one who knows intimately that statement of Meister Eckhart, beautiful statement, the great mystic Meister Eckhart, God is at home. It is we who have gone out for a walk. Isn't that a wonderful statement? So much of a pilgrimage, however, is about play. And I think the pilgrim knows how to play because he knows how to tell a story, the right story. And as pilgrims, we tell stories to each other, real stories. Notice Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Those are wonderful stories, aren't they? Marvelous. Go back and read it if you haven't for some time. The Wife of Bath's Tale. Marvelous stories. Some of them are bawdy, Some of them are hilarious. Well, why not, We need a bawdy tale now and then. Isn't that dreadful of me to suggest? But we need a good story now and then. We're all storytellers. So to be a pilgrim is really to undertake this journey. But we have to begin to realize, in one sense, therefore, that we've taken the pilgrimage because we're in search of something we call Ithaca. It's a nostalgia for paradise, a return, a going back, a discovery again of who we are. And so we're in search. We are searchers. We're on a quest. Well, we'll look further at that this afternoon. I think it's time that I close this session. Any final questions or comments or anything you want to say about being a pilgrim or a tourist about this journey?
If the Pilgrim Fathers were the pilgrims to start with, perhaps, become crusaders, they suffered fear.
That's right. That's a good point, yes. They wanted to change, you see, and what did they call this area? And what is it still called? New England. The whole, the northeastern part of the United States is still...
purely pilgrims in the sense that they did have to have someone to go to anyway.
Yes.
Probably not all about their fear, the fact that they may not have been able to stay there.
That's true. That's true. But it's very easy to turn from being a pilgrim. Don't think that just because you've come in, for those of us who have found the Theosophical Society, and obviously you've all found it because you're all here, so you found it in at least the outer sense, if not in its essence. We've all found it, and many people who have come into the Theosophical Society as pilgrims, seeking, genuinely seeking, become crusaders. This is the way it is, you know, and this is what you have to believe, and this is what really it's all about. Look out for the crusaders of the Theosophical Society. You know, they're dangerous people. They're part of the danger that you meet on the way. But don't let them throw you out of the society. You know, just say, all right, I've got a sword too, you see. And so, you know, I can match your sword because I've got a real sword, you see. So you don't think, and we've got a lot of tourists, you know, there are people who come in and out of the Theosophical Society. They're the tourists. They've enjoyed it for a little while and found it interesting, and they take away certain memories and a lot of souvenirs, you see, and and free literature, you see, those are the souvenirs they take away. But it's very interesting. So, you know, but there's still some of us, I at least count myself among them, who still remain pilgrims.
Someone asked me to tell you why young people aren't interested in the Theosophical Society, and I think in a way, perhaps it's what Carl Jung says, that at that age
they're still tourists. They're still tourists, and that's fine. And that's necessary, you see. That's very necessary.
Joy, you mentioned the age 35 years old, crucial time. Perhaps that's something to do with this very point that Carl was bringing up.
I think it is. And you begin to see it, too, within spiritual organizations. Not only the Theosophical Society, but other organizations that are devoted to the spiritual awakening, you see. And it's very true.
I think we must remember that the tourists come into the pilgrim, become the children.
That's right. The tourist may ultimately become the pilgrim, and I think we can help the tourist become a pilgrim. But I think we must never lose that pilgrim spirit within us, that seeker, that seeking, searching, questing, the real quest to...
I said it was 35, they said we've got another 14 to go.
That's right. So it's wonderful when you begin to see that you can be a pilgrim. I want to be a pilgrim all my life. And I don't care how rough the seas are, you know, because, all right, I may get drowned, but that's wonderful. Somebody will, you know, pull me out, and I'll ultimately have to pull myself out, and so on. But that's great. So I've always said I'd rather be a great and glorious failure than a mediocre success. Because all successes are mediocre. Why? Because it's very easy to be a success. It means you've done something you already knew how to do. That's simple. Anybody can do what they already know how to do. So that's why all successes are mediocre. But to be a great and glorious failure, that means you've attempted something no one has attempted before. At least that you have never attempted before. You've never tried to climb that Mount Analog before, you see. You've never tried to climb out of the Inferno. You've never tried to build the bridge through the Purgatorio. You've never tried to get off the island of Circe in the Odyssean myth, and so on, you see. It's great, it's glorious. And so,
we recently been celebrating Kevin and Hillary timing married.
yes.
And his phrase as a very young man was a laconic will not for those that he has since spent his entire life trying to return to those people who helped him when he was young.
That's right.
He fully became a pilgrim, I believe.
He really became a pilgrim. He really did, I think. Yes, you're absolutely right, he did.
I think the analogy of pilgrim with the Theosophical Society is that the society is for pilgrimage only, not for tourists.
Good.
You can't have a tourist attraction.
No.
Pilgrimage never attracts.
That's right. This is the thing, and I think if I may be blunt, some of our branches in the society try to be tourist attractions rather than places where pilgrimages begin. And I don't think any branch of the society should be a tourist attraction. Isn't that true?
Tours are always advertised, but pilgrimages aren't.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
Do you think this is where the hero cult comes in at the moment? Like, you know, a lot of movies and books about heroes.
Yes.
Is this because the people are seeking the heroes in themselves?
That's right.
They want to see
Yes.
heroic deeds, things that can't be done.
That's right. And you see, the myths present it in large. And so we say, oh, I'm not Odysseus, but everyone is Odysseus. We say, I am not Dante, I am not this hero. But everyone is a hero, or heroine, if you like, of one story. That's your own. You never cast yourself in the role of a villain if you tell your story. Do you? You're always the hero of at least one story, and that's your own.